Today's program speaker is known to many of you. I know because several people came up and said, I'm not going to be able to stay for your presentation, but friends of his, and it's always good to see. Friends. Real friends, right, yeah. Actually, Professor Downs, we look forward to your presentation and have made a contribution to Rotary Polio Plus Fund as a way to say thanks for speaking to us today. As you know, if time allows, and I think it will, we have mics cruising the room. Make sure you wait until the mic gets to you because this is being recorded and we want your questions on record as well so that it's part of the program that you'll be able to see on our YouTube site. Today's subject is freedom of speech and faculty tenure connections to that. Professor Downs will address the original reasons for tenure, which stress the need to protect academic freedom and free inquiry on campuses. But he will also speak to recent changes to tenure at the University of Wisconsin and to the status of free speech and academic freedom on campuses. Donald is the Alexander Michael Jean, I hope I got that right, is that close enough, Emeritus Professor of Political Science and Affiliate Professor of Law and Journalism at UW-Madison. He has won numerous local and national awards for scholarship, teaching, and activism in support of free speech and academic freedom. His scholarship has dealt with a wide range of issues such as academic freedom and free speech, American politics, political thought, political and legal movements, citizenship, campus politics, domestic violence, psychiatry and the criminal law, and relationships among the military, the university, and civic education. His most recent books are Restoring Free Speech and Liberty on Campus and Arms and the University, Military Presence and the Civic Education on Non-Military Students. From 1996 until 2015, he was leader of the Independent Committee for Academic Freedom and Rights and president since 2000, a nationally known UW-Madison group that has led the free speech and academic freedom movement in Madison. And today, he is a consultant to a national campus free inquiry movement centered at the Institute for Humane Studies in Washington, D.C. Please welcome Professor Downs.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I wasn't aware I'm supposed to sing my talk. Part of the deal. Well, if I speak well, then singing will, I think, take its own. It's mentioned that Jeffrey Dahmer had his anniversary thing today. Let me mention very briefly, I'm the proud owner of Jeffrey Dahmer's last toothbrush. It was a quote-unquote gift from a student, but the day after Dahmer was killed in the prison. So if anybody's interested in that, see me after the talk. I spoke here back in 2000, and that was the very morning after the Supreme Court issued its Bush versus Gore decision. And I was up all night, literally taking phone calls from around the world because we got inundated with the press, and I had no sleep at all. So thank God today's national political climate is so non-controversial, so unheated, so predictable. At any rate, a lot's transpired since those times, and higher education's no exception. Now, on the one hand, there's nothing new under the academic sun. We've always had controversies. It's part of life. On the other hand, there are new ones, and a lot of issues that we'll be talking about. Tenures under attack, or at least undergoing reform at different places around the country. Astronomical levels of student debt have reared their heads. Free college, anyone? And also, we're dealing with new expanded forms of campus speech restrictions, such as safe space theory, trigger warning policies, and also microaggression theory, which I'll be talking about later on in the talk. Now, here's a taste of that. One recent school, activists urged instructors to provide trigger warnings before they read The Great Gatsby. And one wonders what's next. War and Peace, Winnie the Pooh. We'll have to see what happens with that. But I want to address the challenges to tenure and academic freedom that have stalked the land in recent times, and to say something about the future of higher education. Take my words with a grain of salt. As Yogi Berra famously said, prediction's always hazardous, especially when it's about the future. I'm no exception to that. Let me start by noting that UW-Madison has long been the epicenter of academic and free speech debates. And we usually get it right in the end. Perhaps sometimes reminiscent of Churchill's famous line that America always gets it right after it's tried everything else. Well, maybe we feel that bill as well. We were ground zero for the famous Richard Ely and Edward Ross cases back in 1894 and 1910. And we experienced some really important academic freedom and free speech debates and issues during the McCarthy era and during the 1960s. And I have some stories, if you want to talk about them in the Q&A later, that are very personal about those eras. Then in the 1980s, late 80s, the era of political correctness came upon us. And this time the threats to academic freedom came more from the left than from the right, as they had before that time. Greg Lukianoff, who's the president of the National Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, FIRE, and a close ally of ours nationally, has told me personally that no school in America has confronted more interesting and controversial free speech and First Amendment issues than UW-Madison over the last 30 years. I can give you some examples in the Q&A if you would like. Now that happens to correspond with my tenure here. And I'll leave it to you whether or not there's a coincidence or what's cause and effect. So let me lay out briefly the major reforms to tenure that have been taking place here under Wisconsin Act 55. It's pretty complicated, so you're getting sort of the Father Sarducci approach to this, very basic and to the point. First of all, tenure protections were removed from state statute. We were pretty unique nationally for having tenure protections in state statutes. They were taken out. But fortunately, the regions have adopted traditional tenure standards within region policy, which is the way it is with most other schools around the country. And I want to thank the regions for that. I think it was Regina a moment here. Let's give her applause. Regions did the right thing. Thank you. Another policy is more controversial, and I think is still in the process of being worked out. And this is the power to dismiss or lay off faculty for more reasons than the traditional reasons of just cause or economic emergency or economic necessity. State law provided for layoffs or terminations based on so-called program changes, continuance, curtailment, modification, or redirection of programs. That's a broader basis for dismissing faculty. Another regent, Tim Higgins, recently sent me some information. This UW Tenure Committee that was set up, and they have recommended that this list be restricted to program discontinuance, which would give less power to lay off faculty based on tenure than before, but we don't know, how that's going to play out in the end. Third, there are changes in shared governance, which has long been a value that a lot of us at UW-Madison have taken very seriously, where faculty, staff, and students get to share in governing power in areas that are related to their expertise. And that has been modified. We no longer have the same power we used to have, which was basically co-power with the administration. It's more advisory now. So that was a major change. And finally, post-tenure reviews come up. We've had that a long time. But it's been given more teeth. And on paper, there's no objection to that, right? I mean, everybody gets reviewed. If we're not doing our job, we'd have no business keeping it. The problem could arise if that is used as a pretext to go after people because of their unpopular views. But again, we'll have to see what happens with that. Now, let me stress a couple of things before I move on. Why are faculty concerned about this? The main reason is because of the special nature of the academic profession. We're not special people. And I don't know any faculty members that think we are. We don't deserve tenure because of our great character, for crying out loud, believe me. But our profession requires that we try to reach scholarly conclusions, right, based on academic freedom and the pursuit of knowledge. And there's a concern that if tenure becomes precarious, then people are going to be more afraid to speak out. So there's a real concern about that, but I'll get into that more fully in a little bit. The nature of our profession requires certain protections that allow us to speak our minds without fear of retaliation. The other reason is more institutional. And this matters to me just as much. That is the status of our institution nationally. UW-Madison, and I'm speaking about UW-Madison, but it applies to other schools as well in the system. We're in a really competitive environment. And already, there was a University of Minnesota tried to steal 5 members of our international relations field in poli-sci, and we kept them by jacking up their pay. But we kept them. But that kind of poaching is a very serious concern. And our competitors are going to say, look, there's stronger tenure protections here than at Madison, even if that's not true. And so, we love this university. And we don't want to see it harmed in terms of that. So hopefully this will not turn into a problem along those lines. All right, so what's tenure about? Let me mention first, it has to be earned. I went through 4 years of the tenure track here. It requires that you show excellence in at least 2 fields among 3, teaching, research, or service. And a lot of people get denied it, especially at a place like UW-Madison. But why does it exist? It exists for one reason, and that is to protect academic freedom and freedom of inquiry, open inquiry on campus. It's a means to that substantive end. If you can find a way to enhance academic freedom and free speech without tenure, then be my guest. If firing each and one of us every year would increase those values on campus, then go for it. The question is whether or not there is a more effective means. Okay? Now, the concept and practice of academic freedom has its origins as far back as Socrates and into the Middle Ages, but really picked up steam in more modern times with the rise of modern science. So before I say something about tenure, let me say something about academic freedom. What is it? It's complicated. There are different dimensions. Individual, and sometimes these dimensions conflict. Individual academic freedom, institutional, departmental. It has different applications. Classroom, research, the dorms, the public forum, the office. So if you take 100 experts on academic freedom, you're going to get 103 different interpretations of it. Okay? But what is its core? And here I'm going to quote from UW-Madison's faculty policies and procedures that protect faculty rights and responsibilities. And this provision was put in there by our movement on campus, 2 members who are here, John Sharpless and Lee Hansen in the back. Here's our definition that the university adopted. Quote, academic freedom is a freedom to discuss and present scholarly opinions and conclusions regarding all relevant matters in the classroom, to explore all avenues of scholarship, research, and creative expression, and to reach conclusions according to one's scholarly discernment. It also includes the right to speak or write as a private citizen, or within the context of one's activities as an employee of the university, without institutional discipline or restraint on matters of public concern, as well as on matters related to professional duties, the function of the university, and university positions or policies, to pursue your truth with professional scholarly acumen. Now, this language parallels the famous language of the plaque that adorns the front of Bascom Hall, based on the Regent's support of academic freedom extending back to 1894. I'm sure you've all heard this. Let me take a sip of water before I quote it. Whatever may be the limitations which trammel inquiry elsewhere, we believe that the great state University of Wisconsin should ever encourage that continuous and fearless sifting and winnowing by which alone the truth can be found, unquote. It's famous. Now, academic freedom and its companion free speech are important because, as I mentioned, they're necessary conditions to the university's central mission, which is truth, pursuit of truth, teaching, and pushing the frontiers of knowledge. I came here from, I taught 1 year at Michigan, 4 years at Notre Dame, and then I came here. The 3 schools are the best fight songs in America. Sports Illustrated did a survey. What's number 1? What do you think? Notre Dame. By the way, my son-in-law here, Matt, who you introduced before, he went to Indiana, so we could all give him a hearty boo. Boo. When's the last time Indiana went to a national championship game of basketball, Matt? And also, you're pushing the frontiers of knowledge. 1985, I came here. There was a national survey. Professors around the country, 100,000. What are the schools that have pushed the frontiers of knowledge the most? We were number 4. Okay, and I was very proud of that when I came here. But because truth is so notoriously difficult to discern, and because the human condition makes us different, there's always going to be disagreement. And that's why freedom of speech is an absolutely essential ingredient of life in general, let alone universities. To use a fancy French term, I hope I get it right, they are the university's raison d'etre, the heart and soul, the essence of what a university is. And, and I also always thought if we do our job right, we're helping to produce more thoughtful, conscientious young people that make for better citizenship in the future. I've always looked at my role as producing citizens. Academic freedom also entails a degree of autonomy for the university as an institution. And about a century ago, a social contract was entered into between universities and political powers that they would allow us to be self-governing to a large extent based on the assumption that we knew how to do our job best, and that we would fulfill our mission of seeking truth, teaching, and research. In a famous 1957 case, Felix Frankfurter, Supreme Court Justice, discussed the 4 essential freedoms of a university: to determine for itself on academic grounds who may teach, what may be taught, how it shall be taught, and who may be admitted to study. Today, these freedoms are under challenge for reasons I'll get into now. Tenure is a more recent development than academic freedom, about 100 years old. And, but it's granted with the basic idea you cannot be terminated once you earn tenure except for just cause or some extreme economic situation. But it was granted with a correlative duty that it presupposes the university will honor its fiduciary duty to be a place where the sifting and winning of ideas takes place. It has priority status over things like politics, ideology, fashion, or anything else. So let me recall a story. So the $64,000 question today is, are we living up to that? In thinking about this question, recall maybe an apocryphal story about Robert Hutchins, who was the president of the University of Chicago several decades ago. And he was thinking about doing away with tenure. And a very distinguished group of faculty went to him and said, if you do away with tenure, today we're standing before you. If you do away with tenure, the next time you see us, we'll be on our knees. So put that in perspective. Now, I have 2 different takes on the question of tenure and free speech and academic freedom. My first point is strategic and somewhat ironic. The new policies governing tenure for the University of Wisconsin have been pushed by conservatives and Republicans in the state legislature. I do applaud what the regents have done to protect us since this has happened. But if indeed tenure goes bad, who's going to be the first people that might feel the brunt? Well, one, the marketplace of ideas on campus. But I would argue, and John Sharpless and I wrote about this in a piece in Political last summer, which a lot of people read, and we got a lot of feedback on it. Those who might be hurt first are conservatives and libertarians. And the reason for this is very simple. Higher education, for better or worse, is slanted in a leftist direction. Certainly that's the case over here at UW-Madison. And the concern then is, who needs the most protection? Campus politics of recent decades supports my concern. I'll give you a couple examples. How much time do I have left? 15 minutes? You gave me a half hour? Oh, well, this is great. You've never finished a talk on time. Matt, you're a witness. You got to tell my wife, Susan, okay? She won't believe it if I tell her. It's horrible to laugh at your own jokes. Anytime you want to chime in, John, you know you and I are hooked at the joint. Oh, yeah, now I got 2 minutes left, right? In the late 1980s, UW-Madison became a pioneer in the so-called speech code movement, which swept higher education. Encouraged by the administration, the faculty adopted student and faculty codes here and around the country, prohibiting statements that offended people on grounds of race, gender, religion, sexual orientation, and other categories. Now, this was well-intentioned, and I actually supported the first speech codes. My first book supported things like that. That's why they hired me here. Then I did a 180. I got hired by the basis of fraud, I guess. The problem is that, though well-intentioned, they were applied in politicized ways all over the country. I can tell you things to read, books to read about this. In practice, the codes led to enforcements that suppressed ideas and individuals, while also chilling the honest presentation of intellectual opinions. And intellectual honesty is really the name of the game. Because if you sort of say something you don't really mean, how can you arrive at truth? Truth can be painful. Think of how many people were deeply offended by Darwin. And let alone think if you were a monkey, how you felt being related to human beings. And so, we wonder why Donald Trump is doing so well publicly. At least he speaks his mind. I'll leave it to you whether there are other virtues or not. I'm not here to be political. But that's one thing that I think is helping him. Some speech codes seem to step out of the onion, which, by the way, is a proud UW-Madison product. I've had onion students, and I take great pride in them. One code out east prohibited inappropriate laughter. You're supposed to laugh now. Quick question. Is anyone in this room clairvoyant enough to tell when laughter turns from being appropriate into being inappropriate? Talk about a gray area. Billy Budd, Melville, talks about insanity, and he compares it to the rainbow. He says, we know when someone's insane, but do we know when that starts? And he says, the rainbow, we know that red turns to orange, but we can't say where. Fundamental principle of law, it must be clear so you know where you stand vis-a-vis the law. Inappropriate laughter? Boy. After a while, we discovered the codes were being applied almost exclusively against speech deemed politically incorrect or otherwise inconsistent with burgeoning progressive ideology on campus. 1990, we had a notorious case here that really fueled our movement. I won't get into the details, but a conservative Catholic art professor was being badgered for years. At least he wasn't being Wolverined or Hoosiered, my God. But he was being badgered for years because of his conservative views. And the two students that were his tormentors, he finally said, look, let's leave each other alone. They still badgered him. He turned and said, "Sieg Heil, comrades." But notice how balanced that was. It was both Hitler and Stalin. And they reported him to the administration for violating the faculty speech code. My kids used to call me Hitler all the time when they were little. I'd say things like, when they were 6 years old, it's after midnight, maybe you should think about going to bed. You're a fascist. You can't have a fourth ice cream cone. Well, that's all he meant. And he was literally investigated under the aegis of the faculty speech code. He was ultimately vindicated, but only after his reputation had been ruined. And he asked the university for a public vindication. It did not come. He asked to look at the record of the inquiry, and it was not provided. They said, we lost the record. So that gives you sort of one example of what happened in those days. There are many other examples. As a result of this kind of stuff, we formed our group. Excuse me. For some reason, after retiring, I get thirsty more often. We formed our group, the Committee for Academic Freedom and Rights, with a lot of outside funding, and we initiated our movement. 3 years later, it was 1996, 3 years later, we brought down the faculty speech code, which was the basis of what happened to my colleague, in a vote in the faculty senate, which had national attention. Since that time, we've won many other victories, including policy victories, changing rules governing academic freedom on campus, and we've taken the cases of over 20 individuals, not just here, but around the state, whose rights have been put in jeopardy. We're a pretty unprecedented kind of movement, and I'm very proud of it. You can read all about it in my book, Restoring Free Speech and Liberty on Campus. You should buy several copies. Give them to your friends, and I'll even sign them if they're available. Okay, so that's, but here's the rub. We were in CAFO, we had about 20 individuals. liberal, conservative. One of them, Mary Anderson, she doesn't even know what a liberal or conservative is. She's a distinguished scientist. She just does science. And nonpartisan. But most of the victims that we protected were people that were sort of went against the grain of progressive ideology on campus. But here's the rub. Tenure was instrumental to our movement's success, as well as shared governance, because we were given power to act within the faculty senate to bring about these changes. And I just wonder, without tenure, would we have been as successful? There were times, we became a presence on campus. We had a lot of allies. We became diplomatic because we were successful. But at the beginning, we really had to butt heads. We took things on. We took risks. There are people in this audience that know that. Would we have done it without tenure? Well, who can answer, what do you call that in history? What didn't happen? But it does really raise concerns. Now, the present administration at Madison is thankfully very supportive of academic freedom and freedom of speech. I have high praise for our present chancellor. And but administrations can change over time. Maybe somebody of you read about the St. Mary's president who talked about how students that aren't doing well should be treated like baby rabbits and drowned. He actually said that last week. What if we got a chancellor like that? 2007, there was a professor in another, I'm not going to say what school, he gave a speech here after all this happened. It was Len Kaplan. And he was persecuted for something he said in class that was totally misinterpreted. It was actually there was a minority group in the state coming from another country, and he made statements in class about how certain people with those backgrounds suffer under our civil justice system because they're not understood. The students misinterpreted that as putting them down. And a national campaign was raised against this professor. It went viral, and calls came out from all over the place to fire him. Eventually he prevailed, and our group supported him very publicly and behind the scenes. He was not fired. But I had individual faculty members from that school as well as elsewhere who told me after what happened to Kaplan, I'm afraid to say anything really controversial about these issues in class. One of these people was the most famous person in his school, and he'd had tenure for how many decades? So these are things I think we should be concerned about. Also, students need us to be intellectually honest. I can't tell you how often I hear from students, we want more intellectual diversity. We want more clash of ideas. Education should be an adventure. One of Nietzsche's great lines is, "Oh, you tremble over my heart. You would tremble all the more if you knew where I was taking you." That's how education should be, no? And if those of you that have experienced that, I'm sure you appreciate it. Recently, the University of New Hampshire issued a bias-free language guide that told students to avoid words like American. I guess the American Civil Liberties Union needs to change its name. Homosexual, illegal alien, Caucasian, and others. And this is in the state whose motto is live free or die. I actually have the license plate up on my bookshelf at home, a gift from a student, better than the Donner gift. Now, does anyone at University of New Hampshire realize or care how this kind of thing chills speech on campus? A couple days ago, I read the University of Portland issued a policy urging students and others to report discomforting situations, quote unquote. Now, this isn't just to your dorm counselor. This is to the police. And isn't education supposed to be somewhat discomforting? If I'm at Portland, I'm calling the police tomorrow and saying this policy discomforts me. Jerry Seinfeld. You talked about how I seem to know about sports and other things. I have every Seinfeld episode memorized. It drives my wife crazy. But he won't even come to college campuses now because his humor is considered too politically incorrect. You're being deprived. It's one thing to be deprived of me being intellectually honest. Think of being deprived of Jerry Seinfeld. So it's sort of like this political correctness thing reminds me of the Fatal Attraction, Glenn Close, and she keeps reviving herself, coming out of that bathtub. It just keeps sort of coming back. Well, why are we confronting this? And I'm about ready to conclude. We've sort of mixed up our missions. And missions like dogmatic versions of things that are otherwise virtuous, like diversity, like social justice. When they become dogmas that we're not allowed to question, they can become oppressive. Jonathan Haidt, a well-known social psychologist who's recently written about this, has said the following about social justice in universities. He says, it's really scary that values other than truth have become sacred on campus. And what I keep trying to say, this comes right out of my book, The Righteous Mind, which you should all read right after my book, is that you can't have two sacred values. Because what you do when they conflict. And in the academy now, if truth conflicts with social justice, truth gets thrown under the bus, at least too often. I think he's exaggerating, but there's a lot of truth in what he said. And it's not like political powers in our state and elsewhere don't recognize this. I hear it from them. So I'm all in favor of social justice. And I applaud the people that go out there and fight for it in the public forum. That's using freedom of speech too. Right on. But 2 points have to be stressed. First of all, it's not the primary mission of the university, because that becomes political. It politicizes the university. And second of all, what is social justice? I've taught political theory. The fundamental question of political theory is, how shall we live? It's the question of what is justice. There is no single definition. Is it more free market? Is it less free market? Is it community? Is it individualism? The question of social justice should be open to exhilarating debate rather than closed. So even if we accept it as an important thing, it needs to be open to First Amendment principles. The bottom line, one more sip. My students always wonder what was in the water that I drank. Truth and politics are not compatible at their core. So, just watch the debates. As the great political theorist Hannah Arendt wrote in a seminal 1962 essay, Truth and Politics, quote, "It may be in the nature of the political realm to be at war with truth in all its forms. A commitment to even factual truth is felt to be an anti-political attitude," unquote. So let me finish by quoting a professor from Berkeley who spoke out at the very beginning of the free speech movement at Berkeley in 1964, which is sort of the beginning of the rise of the social justice university. And he posed some problems. He said, the main task we face is preserving the university not merely as a free political community, but primarily as an institution which is privileged to be an intellectual sanctuary within a greater society that is now in political flux. Our time. After all, the university's prime mission resides not in political activity, but in the cultivation of the intellectual freedoms, unquote. If we are not doing that, we are not fulfilling our end of the social contract that was the basis for academic freedom in the first place. So my concern is not only with what's happening down at one end of State Street, it's what could be happening at the other end. Now, we have done a much better job at Madison than most other schools, partly for the reasons I've talked about. So I'm speaking more about higher education in general. I've never known how to stop a talk. I just stop. So I'm done. No, Ron, you cannot have the toothbrush.
No, thank you. So thank you for being here today, and I guess I'm wondering if you could help us with the term political correctness. Can you help us in terms of what's the origin? Mm-hmm. Week or day doesn't go by that people don't bandy around the term, and sometimes I think there's a definition from the left, there's a definition from the right.
And
so
by the way, the right has its own forms of it now, which is unfortunate. Well, the origin was under Stalin, and it was a scientific realism. Social realism, that the idea was that if you're pursuing scientific knowledge in the Soviet Union, it must serve a political cause. And so the knowledge and the pursuit of truth has to be compatible with a particular kind of political vision. And then the more recent incarnation, some of the more watered down form of that is in America, because we are a democratic country, But it's sort of an idea that I know the whole truth. I have a monopoly on morality. And if you disagree with me, it's not simply that we disagree, it's that there's something fundamentally wrong with you. And that kind of attitude is really problematic. It makes people afraid to speak their honest minds. And, my big problem with our national politics, everything's so stuck in paradigms. The one thing I say I like about Trump and I like about Sanders, they're shaking it up. We need to break through these straitjackets of thought. And political correctness, I think, is a kind of a straitjacket. It has different degrees, of course. I make a big distinction between liberalism and political correctness. We've had, liberalism is open-minded, it believes in progressive aspects, but it's tolerant of disagreement, and it doesn't personalize every single disagreement. So our movement in Wisconsin was largely successful because we had a lot of liberals that agreed with us. So it's not a conservative liberal thing. It's a more radical form of leftism. And of course, we all know there's certain aspects of the radical right that do the same thing.
Yes, wonderful presentation, I'm sorry. And I just want to affirm everything that you said. The one suggestion, just moving forward though, as we talk about returning to tenure situation, is to look at the wider picture. I was a return student from 2006 to 2010, so many of my friends were not only the tenured faculty, but also folks who didn't have tenure or teaching assistants, many students who also had dilemmas in terms of being able to speak authentically and on controversial subjects.
I do it all the time.
Yeah, no, I know. So anyway, I think this is a principle that has to be applied across the board. If the pendulum swings in the right direction,
Absolutely.
Academic freedom has to apply for everyone.
The idea of free speech is, you say, well, my ox isn't being gored, so I don't care. But what happens if the times change? And then suddenly your ox is gored. Then, liberalism is like an insurance policy, liberal democracy. I will respect your rights if you promise to respect mine. It can get as basic as that. Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm a physician, and I'm a little troubled by a fellow named Timothy Leary. He was a Harvard professor.
I know all about him.
And he was.
I teach a case involving him.
Anyway, he did some interesting things. He proselytized quite a lot.
Yeah.
And some would say he hurt a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I don't know what to say about a fellow like that. I don't know if he should be protected by free speech and political correctness or what.
Question. What if someone is violating the other end of the bargain, that they're actually being dogmatic? Yeah, forget the term I wanted to use. Maybe John up here or someone else can leak and give me a better sense for it. When you are, what's the term? Not dogmatizing. No, it's more sinister. Oh, gosh, this happens, retirement. You're not a psychiatrist, are you? Okay. I'll think of it. But there's, pardon? No. Indoctrination. Thank you. Who said that? Lee, of course. My colleague from KFAR. And one of the great counter voices on campus. Indoctrination is a problem. And I think it's okay to profess and take a point of view in class. I do that, partly because I know my points of view are sometimes different from that of many others, and the students need to hear that. But you have to do it in the spirit of inviting discussion, bringing it on, and of being tolerant of disagreements. If the purpose is pedagogical, it's okay to take a certain point of view, but it must be subservient to the pedagogical mission of instruction and open mind and open inquiry. There was a case at Wesleyan a few years ago where a professor was teaching a class on, I forget what it was something to do with Jewish studies. And he assigned a book called The Secret War Between Blacks and Jews. And it's a book that is deeply anti-Semitic and very much in the spirit of the protocols of the elders of Zion. And he was teaching it to his students as truth. And a woman named Mary Lefkowitz, very well-known historian, she said, this is just wrong. This is violating your duty as a pedagogue. And she fought behind the scenes to get him to teach that in a kind of different way. I wrote something about that in an essay I wrote a few years ago on academic freedom, and I said, this does make me somewhat uncomfortable. I don't want, the truth squad at Madison overlooking my shoulder and saying, you need to teach it this way. But we had to have a lot of leeway here. But a line in that case was crossed, and a case can be made that she was right. She didn't get fired. They didn't let him teach the course, but they said, you cannot indoctrinate. And the American Association of University Professors has a whole position about indoctrination. Indoctrination is wrong, and that means telling students there's no other point of view except yours, and refusing to accept any teaching or discussion about that. And that is wrong. But you want to be careful when you do it, because that opens a door. I can tell you stories where people I know have been perfectly respectable teachers, have been pressured by certain committees on campus not to teach the way they taught.
One more question? Two?
Who's got the mic?
There, here, and then we're done.
You go ahead. Nancy, go ahead.
Oh, good. Thank you. I've been trying to figure out whether or not I wanted to ask you this question, but I'm having trouble getting away from your comment about Jeffrey Dahmer and the toothbrush.
Oh, sorry.
And I just need to know if you were being sarcastic.
Oh, no, the student gave it to me. This is a
Right.
true story.
I know it's true, but were you being sarcastic about being proud of that?
Oh, of course. I was trying to be funny.
I feel
With my
like,
usual success, I can tell.
well, it's really hard to be funny about.
Oh, I'm sorry. I
That
understand.
situation.
I understand that.
Thank you.
Can I respond to you once again very quickly? Now, of course, I forgot what it was going to be. Oh, yeah. The problem with, and this gets into this, I was going to mention, we really got this idea from John Sharpless here in the past. To the extent that universities deny there's such a thing as objective truth, postmodernism, et cetera, we undermine the basis, A, for being taken seriously, and B, for legitimizing ourselves because of our traditional justifications, and C, we undermine any ability to distinguish indoctrination from non-indoctrination. If you believe there's no such thing as objective truth, then okay, the Holocaust didn't occur. Let's start with something very basic like that. Or there wasn't slavery in America. There are things that are true. They're hard sometimes to get at and to interpret. But there is such a thing as truth beyond us. So that's part of the indoctrination issue, is that it's harder to tell truth from indoctrination when universities no longer believe there's such a thing as objective truth. So that we've helped harm ourselves by that to the extent we've done that.
Meeting adjourned.